Welcome to Dialogues in Afro-Latinidad, a podcast dedicated to amplifying and elevating Afro-Latin American and Afro-Latinx histories, cultures, and communities. I'm your host, Dr. Michele Reid-Vazquez. Join us for conversations with experts and artists to learn more about Afro-Latinidad. Venga. It's my pleasure to welcome today's guest, Dr. Zuly Inirio. Dr. Inirio is an Afro-Dominican soprano with a doctorate of musical arts from Louisiana State University. She has appeared as a soloist throughout the U.S. and Europe. She actively pursues bringing awareness to Afro-Latinidad in classical music with her Afro-Latinx Song and Opera project. She uses her artistry and activism to work toward representation and equity for communities that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. She has performed Jake Hagee's Natural Selection, where she worked with the composer directly and was a soprano soloist in Verdi's Requiem in Munich under the baton of Massimiliano Murali. Most recently, she has sung the role of the High Priestess and covered the title role in Verdi's Aida in Italy. Welcome to the Dialogues in Afro-Latinidad podcast. I am so excited to have you on today. As you know, I love music and I know some of the challenges of the classical music world. And as an Afro-Dominican opera singer, I know you have a powerful story to share. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So where did you grow up and how did you get started as a musician?
My parents are both from the Dominican Republic, and I was born in New Jersey, but I was moved to Santo Domingo when I was like 1 year old, and I grew up there until I was about 8, and then from there I went to Miami, Florida, and I would say that I got started with music after I moved to Miami and I was in like 5th grade. I got started with music by being in a choir, like an after-school choir. Mm-hmm. And the music teacher, like I got a solo for one of the performances, and the music teacher there told my parents, you should really invest in voice lessons for her because she's really good. She's a very good singer. And so my parents took me to voice lessons for a little bit, and I was just kind of having fun and all of that. And so that's how I got into singing and kind of playing the piano a little bit, but I mostly focused on singing just early on. And I would say that I got into opera when I was about 15 years old, and my sister took me to my first opera. I went to go see La Traviata by Verdi, which is, the opera that everybody knows from like Little Women. And not Little Women, Pretty Woman.
Yes.
Yes, the opera that was shown in Pretty Woman. And I was just floored by the whole spectacle of it. It made such an impact on me to hear a live orchestra, see the costumes and everybody moving and singing and hearing people that weren't amplified by microphones. And I could hear them all the way in the back. And it was just so magical to me. And I was like, wow, I really want to do that. And so that was it for me. I saw it and I was like, what is this? I love it.
I love this. And so how did you go from this 15-year-old thrust into this magical world to pursuing your doctorate in music and getting on this trail of creating your Afro-Latinx Song and Opera project? So yeah, how did you make that transition?
I don't know, I've always been very like headstrong in a way, and when I did like set my mind to something, that's what I want to do. And when I saw that opera, I was like, I want to do that. My sister was like, oh yeah, whatever, sure, right? Because that's so random. And, nobody else in my family does anything in music. Like nobody's like quote unquote musical. I grew up around music and listening to a lot of merengue, bachata, merengue típico, like growing up, but nothing in the classical realm. So my parents, they were wonderful in the way that they let me explore a lot of things, even if they maybe didn't understand what I was doing. They're just like, oh, she wants to try that. Go ahead, whatever. And so when I told them I was like, I really like opera, I continued with my voice lessons and we looked for different ways for me to perform. And when I finished high school and went into college, I did summer classes and I started taking like beginning voice lessons when I went into college just to test it out and see, because at that time I didn't read music or anything like that. So in a way, I was a little behind other people that might be going into music school. So, but I learned how to read music in a semester, and I was between either being a opera singer or a astronomer, and I went with singing.
I love it. I love
And
these.
so
Opera singer, astronomer. Let's see. I love it.
yeah, and so the funny thing is that I didn't choose astronomy because I said, "Oh, everything is just theories. Nothing is proven. Music is more secure."
Oh,
But
that's
jokes on
I.
me because
That is too funny.
music is also very much like I can prepare, and then whatever happens in the moment happens.
Hmm.
And so I did my undergrad in Miami. I started at Florida International University and moved to New World School of the Arts in downtown. And then I did my master's. So then after I did that, and while I was doing my undergrad in Miami, I worked in the chorus at Florida Grand Opera, which was a wonderful experience. And being in the chorus really taught me so much, honestly, in the professional chorus. Um, from there, I moved on to doing my master's and my doctorate at Louisiana State University. And I didn't go to do my master's with the intention of doing my doctorate, but I did stay for my doctorate just because I wanted to get as much knowledge as possible about my craft and continue honing my craft, and do the kind of I also was interested in doing some research, and so I did it during my doctorate. And so that's how I ended up being a doctor of music. It's just kind of like it, that was the path, and I just went with it.
Absolutely. So thinking about that path, I know we've talked, I've mentioned a little bit about this, but I want you to elaborate on this Afro-Latinx Song and Opera project. How does this connect? Where did this emerge from? How does it connect to your passion surrounding music and Afro-Latinidad?
I for a long time, classical music is very Eurocentric, and for a long time, I was longing to see myself represented in the music that I sing, or at least
Mhm.
have the option to sing things that I can relate to on a very deep and personal level. Because during my doctorate, I did a whole song cycle, a Spanish song cycle, or a song recital. It was all Spanish music, but everything is like music from Spain, or if it's from Latin America, it's usually very rooted in European Western music. So, and also the poetry too. It's things that don't necessarily reflect Afro-Latinidad. And so, since this pandemic, everybody had to slow down
Mhm.
and just really think about things, and especially in opera, things completely shut down. I had the time to just really think about, how can I make this happen? How can I, how can I sing music that reflects me?
Mm.
And there's been a lot of that in the opera world lately, like just commissioning of works
Mhm.
that tell the stories of Black and Indigenous and people of color in general. And so I was like, but nobody's talking about Afro-Latinidad. And
Exactly.
so I was like, but okay. So I was like, if I want this to happen, I'm going to have to do it myself.
That's
and,
right.
so, and so I did. And so I came up with, I really like thought about a lot of ideation about how this is going to work, what I want to do with it. And at first it was just going to be like a one-time project, but I changed it to, it's just going to be a constant, like ongoing project with different
Mhm.
um, commissions, different people convening, and different partners coming together to get these stories told and to have this music commissioned. Because um, not only does it give me performance opportunities, which is something that I struggle with as a Black woman in opera, and this happens a lot with um, Black and Brown people, and people of color in general in classical music. We don't get to be imagined as anything other than how we present,
Mhm.
as opposed to some of our other colleagues that are not people of color. They get to be imagined to be anything. And
Mm.
so this not only gives us more performance opportunities, but it also um, exposes the opera public to stories that didn't know, complexities of Latinx identities they didn't maybe know, and it diversifies like the classical music canon. So um, I think it just does so much just to tell the stories through this music.
Can you give me an example of one of the projects that you're working on out of this?
Well, the first thing that we did is, I have to fundraise to get these things commissioned. So I applied for fiscal sponsorship, and my project is now fiscally sponsored. So it has nonprofit status, which is great.
Excellent. Yes.
And right now I am reaching out to the first project I want to do is there's a lot of wonderful people putting their art and their writing on social media,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of Afro Latinx people doing this right now. And the first project that we're doing is making a song cycle of poetry of these Afro Latinx artists that kind of put their stuff on social media that might not be the traditional route
Mhm.
that people usually publish their work. And that's why I wanted to do that. So it's like a song cycle that tells with a collection of poetry set to music. Um,
Sounds wonderful. Are there any particular kinds of composers that you're trying to showcase, artists, or other musicians that you're trying to showcase in the work?
Yeah, I definitely am wanting to connect with Afro Latinx composers. There's a couple that I'm speaking with right now. And also, I don't want to just, usually song cycles is just voice and piano. But I do want to bring in other instruments. And not only that, like um, other styles of music that you usually don't find in classical music that can infuse this music that have Afro indigenous roots with their respective countries. So I want to, I mean, I'm Dominican, so of course I'm thinking of like Villamella, and I'm thinking of Palo and that kind of, yeah, African drumming. I want to incorporate guitas and things like that into my music. And so I'm collaborating with a composer that really understands that kind of music as well. So
Wow.
I think eventually what I'm hoping for is maybe uh, like a competition, like
Ooh,
for composers. So
yes.
there'll be poetry. This is kind of like the task, and then people can write different pieces to the same music, and there could be like a composition contest to bring more of this work to incentivize creating some more of this work of bringing Afro Latinx text to classical music.
I can't wait. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And so shifting gears just a little, as an artist and educator, how do you think your work, and particularly this project, how do you think it helps us get a better understanding of Afro-Latinx communities, whether it's the histories or expressive culture? How do you see that?
Yeah. So the class, I want to specifically say, like, I'm working within the classical music realm, which is its own little microcosm
Uh-huh.
of, and it usually reflects more often than not some of the most um, traditional views that we find in our societies and the systems we live in, right? So um, I I'm part of the reason I'm doing this is because of my own experience within the opera world where I've never there the concept or the idea of Latinidad or what Latinidad looks like is not me,
Mm,
even though I am Latina, right? And I say, I
yes.
mean, I'm Afro Latina, but so I'm never considered for any roles that call for a Latina. There's a particular,
Wow.
there's a very, one of the bigger opera houses, uh, they had a Latinx or Latino concert It was like Noche de no sé qué, de Pasión, I think it was
Mm-hmm.
called, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't a single Afro-Latinx singer there.
That is what we're up against. Yeah.
Right. So it's like the idea that it's very their idea in classical music of Latinidad is very, it's like a very monolithic idea. It's a very homogenous idea that you have to look a certain way. And so I will only get considered for, you know, certain roles for my voice type, but also roles that call for black singers, which, yes, I'm black, but I'm also Latina, so I can be considered for the Latina roles, but because their idea of Latinidad doesn't involve blackness, then I'm not considered for it. So I think that there's just part of the issue is challenging what Latinidad is because they don't know.
Right. I mean, it is very much, you say it's a microcosm, but it's a microcosm that's very reflective of what kind of the broader society thinks of when they think,
Exactly.
and when they think of Latinidad, it does not typically include people of African descent.
It really doesn't. And so so in that particular realm, there's no understanding of Afro-Latinidad. So that's the this project, while creating opportunities for people like me, is also educating people. You know, just creating and commissioning these works is going to educate them that there's something else to Latinidad that they don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
which and I am of the belief that blackness is an integral part of Latinidad and its history. So you can't say that you're championing Latinx people within classical music without including people of African descent that are Latinx.
Definitely. And speaking of your work in classical music, would you mind singing something for us?
Okay, let me see if I can sing a little bit.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
And even thinking about that, I mean, that this issue about the absence of blackness in Latinidad in the classical world, and I'm just wondering, is that, would you say that that is kind of the most pressing issue for Afro-Latinx musicians, and certainly, and if
Yeah.
in one space, and then another, how does that seep out into Afro-Latinx communities and their challenges?
Well, it's just, I mean, I just don't, in the classical realm, a lot of the time I don't feel fully understood as to who I am as a person, because it's like, well, why, questions like, well, why do you speak Spanish? When did you learn? Like, or, oh, what, you're Dominican. Okay, but wait, are you like half? Are you like they're trying to figure out? It's almost like, it's like does not compute. Like I could see it written in their face.
Like, ¿cómo es posible?
Right. And I'm just like, oh boy. So so that's, so just not being fully understood as a person is kind of what in classical music is what inspired me to do this, and it is one of the pressing issues because we're not getting considered for roles that I think that we should be being considered for. Mm-hmm. But I also think that addressing so then outside of the classical world, then there's like Latinos that they just kind of assume that classical music is not a genre that there are Latinos in.
Right.
And so then I'm like, yeah, but I'm Latina, and look, I'm doing that. Sometimes Latinos, within my own broad Latino community, they're still like, oh, but you are Latina, right? And I'm like, oh my God.
Wait, because you do opera? There's that question, or is it because you're Afro-Dominican?
Because I'm Afro-Dominican.
Okay.
And so then I run into that. And then there is, um, but then, of course I'm like, no, I'm Dominican. They're like, okay, whatever. But, yeah, it's just, classical music is always perceived as something that's done. It's like a predominantly white space, which it is. And I think that the general public and our Latinx communities do not realize that there's Latinos, um, in this realm. And I think that if they were more aware of that, there would be more support. And also, like, people want to see themselves represented on the stage, right? Like, people want to
Exactly.
see themselves in the things that they go be patrons of. So if you're not listening to your community as like an opera company or whatever project you're doing and showing them things that they can relate to, they're not going to be engaged. And this project is a way to um, engage your communities as well. Like, there's definitely many cities and many areas in the United States that is heavily populated with Afro Latinos, and I'm sure they would love to see the stories of Afro Latinos in classical music, and they would go to the opera for that. I'm really inspired by this Houston Grand Opera in Texas. There, a few years ago, they commissioned an opera, and it was a mariachi opera.
Wow.
So there was mariachi on stage, and it wasn't just that they were part of the opera. It was called a mariachi opera. So it was telling a story of, it was telling a particular story that is a Mexican story, and that to me was just brilliant because those kinds of works are very much very valid, deserve to have that space, and it brings in a whole new audience and opens them up and exposes them to classical music, which they should. There's also something that they can take part in.
I think your point about this representation is really so critical that yes,
Hmm.
it's classical music. It's simply a genre of music. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean that only one group of people get to claim it and represent themselves only in it. And I think that whole point about seeing yourself doing this, seeing
Hmm.
yourself presented in this way, seeing your stories being told in this form are extremely important that people that if you don't see it, I mean, again, you had this kind of life-changing moment in seeing the opera that you did at 15, but what just imagine if you had seen it, seen someone who looked like you singing these parts,
Right.
what how influential, how more even more impactful that would have been.
Well, when I first started taking voice lessons, my voice teacher at the time, she was like, "Why don't you go to the music library, do some listening, and tell me what recordings you like?" So I couldn't find a single, person of color, first of all, at first.
Mhm.
And then I landed with a Leontine Price, this beautiful woman
Yes.
from Laurel, Mississippi, singing. And that's when I was like, oh, wow, I can actually sing this because I saw somebody that looked like me. And then I landed my favorite singer, Martina Arroyo, who is half Puerto Rican, half African American, and she is one of the most famous singers. She's still alive, lives in New York, and I was like, oh my gosh, oh, so I can actually do this.
Exactly. I mean, again, that's what that representation does. It says, yes, I can do this. You can do this.
Like, this is a possibility for me. So when I saw those two singers, I brought that back to my lesson, and I was like, I want to sing like them. And my teacher was like, this is a very good choice.
Well, that's
But
good.
yeah,
Oh, but there's a but in there.
she was just like, very good choice.
Okay.
Good. Okay, let's get started. But that really meant so much to me to see people that look like me sing and be part of this art form because it's a beautiful art form. I
Absolutely.
know
Hmm.
that there was a time I did a concert once at Harvard, yeah, in Boston, and there was a young girl there, and she was Dominican. She's Dominican, and she freaked out that she met a Dominican opera singer. She never thought, she was like, I really thought like no Dominicans did this. Like I had no idea. And she was just so emotional about the fact that she met a Dominican opera singer and was so, and I keep in touch with her and everything. And so like, even within that one concert that I did made an impact on her, and she still continues to sing. So seeing us represented out there really does make a difference, um, and I hope that companies really start taking that to heart.
Well, that's a beautiful, representation, as we're talking about, of
Mm.
someone of the impact of seeing themselves reflected in the work. And I'm so glad she got a chance to tell you that, because again, you might not have ever known about it.
No, I really wouldn't have. She was really lovely. She came up to me after the concert. She was like, "Oh my God, I'm Dominican too. I'm so happy." And and I was just like, really, that's the first time something like that ever happened to me. And I was like, oh wow,
But it tells you, I mean, it's really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of
yeah,
who's listening, who's watching, who needs to see
right,
someone like you on the stage.
right.
So we just have a little bit of time left, and so I wanted to get a sense of, in addition to your roles in Verdi's Requiem and Aida, and your references to kind of the inspiration you received from Leontine Price and the music of you said Martina
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 Arroyo.
Arroyo.
Yes.
For their work, what other specific artists or recordings or resources would you recommend to people who are interested in learning more about this topic, Afro-Latinos in classical music?
This is a very like this, Afro Latinos in classical music do exist. We're still coming out more
Mhm.
and being highlighted more. I know that I do the work of like highlighting and talking about this on the Afro-Latinx Song Opera project, which can be found on Instagram as Afro-Latinx Opera, as well as on Facebook. We're working on our website. And then I also do a lot of work with a group called a grassroots group called Latina Women in Opera. And in that group, we tend to focus on um, uplifting Black and Indigenous opera singers and the things that affect them the most. So we also have that there. In my own personal account, if you find me on Instagram, I talk a lot about Afro-Latinidad and in classical music, and some Afro-Latinx people in opera that you can support. Of course, there's a beautiful singer that's Afro-Panamanian. Her name is Laquita Mitchell, and she's a beautiful singer. I know that I think just past weekend just did a concert in New York with the Harlem Chambers Players, and beautiful singer, beautiful voice. Of course, Martina Arroyo, another beautiful Afro-Colombian singer who's currently in Germany. Her name is Betty Garces, and she's a wonderful singer that you can listen to her YouTube videos and support her. So we're out there, we're doing our thing, and we're bringing Afro-Latinidad to the forefront with the work that we do.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your story of Afro-Latinidad and activism in classical music.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Dialogues on Afro-Latinidad, please subscribe to our podcast and tell a friend. For links to the resources mentioned in the interview, visit our website at michelereidvazquez.com/podcast.